attacking the Communist Party of China. It's a totalitarian government. That's been our position, still is our position, probably always will be.
Not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China.
Kung Flu. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one.
Look, he is. I mean, he took it in the sense that he is the guy who runs the country that is running the country based on.
We are live now. So yeah, today we're gonna have a great guest. I'm starting today in English because it's too many languages to change in my brain. Today we're gonna have a talk with, of course, my camera is in the wrong place. As usual, this starts very chaotic. Today we're going to have a nice conversation with Angelo Giuliani. Angelo Giuliano, who is a Swiss political and financial analyst living in China since 1995, and also a political activist in China as well. So without further ado, let's bring Angelo. And of course, no, not yet. The software has not brought you in. Okay, now we have you. How are you doing, Angelo?
Angelo, it's a great pleasure to be on your show, and glad to share with you my experience. I mean, first-hand experience in color revolution. So I think it's important whenever we talk about those color revolution to just have a broader image. Why do we have those color revolution on the first place?
Yes.
It's important to see, it's not, when did it start, those color revolution? It's hard to say because before it was done covertly by the CIA, and the first ones were mainly in South America. And then you had this new concept of a color revolution. And I would say one of the very first one was maybe in Myanmar, in Burma, in the 80s. And when it comes to China, 1989 was probably the first one. I mean, very obvious one. And actually, the person that actually wrote the playbook of the color revolution, I have to remember his name. It will get back to me. But he was actually on the Tiananmen Square in 1989. So that was already a color revolution. So basically, you have foreign meddling, but it was not that sophisticated as it is now. So back then, there was a cooperation between media. You had Radio Free Asia that was on the ground. You had Reuters. Reuters was very active in promoting this color revolution. And you had CIA agents. Now, the way a color revolution happens now are much more sophisticated. You have a huge amount of money poured into a country. You have lots of NGOs. You have the CIA has been rebranded under the name of NED, which is the National Endowment for Democracy. So it's and the strategy is very much different. Depends on which country. They use different entities, different strategy. So, for example, in developing countries, in Central South America, they tend to use USAID, and but basically they come in a country saying, well, we are going to help you, give you, school your kids and so on. But ultimately, the ultimate goal is to overthrow. Either put a
give you mirrors and some, jibber jabber, just like they did in Brazil.
Well, exactly, and I think it's important just to why we should fight those color revolution, because they go against, even though they say they want to establish democracy, but they go against the fundamentals of democracy. The fundamentals of democracy, the first one is actually sovereignty. Because democracy is a process of self-determination. If you're in South America, you're in a country in the global south. Why would you want the decisions to be made in Washington? So this is why countries in the global south, they have understood that this is a new type of colonialism, where they want the puppets come from the West. They are Western educated, they come and they are supported by funding propaganda, and they are ultimately working not for the country, but for the globalist agenda. Exactly. For the US and ultimately for the globalist agenda. So this is why we need to raise this level of education, and especially when it comes to sovereignty. And sovereignty is it's a complex issue, because sovereignty is not only physical, it's the information space, it's people, it's national security laws. National security laws are actually laws that are extremely important if you want to protect your sovereignty. So you should. So for example, if you are a paid agent, you should declare yourself.
Yes.
In the US, for example, that's what they do. So what is interesting is that the US has probably the worst, most severe national security laws to protect their sovereignty, but they do not want that the rest of the world have the similar laws.
Yes, exactly. When we look at, for example, the recent situation in Georgia, when the Georgia government tried to pass a FARA, which is the type of FARA, which is the American Foreign Agent Law, and just like that, protests everywhere from random people. They just decide to be very politicized and no, foreign agent law. No, foreign agent law is not good for our country. They're very, very smart people. Same thing in Nicaragua, for example. Nicaragua is considered a dictatorship because of the foreign agent law that they have. That is more or less the same as the United States. So please, I'm sorry, just...
Yeah, but I actually have another example. Now in Venezuela, you have a person that represents the opposition. Her name is Machado. Machado, very early on, she had a media called Sumate, and that media was funded by NED, which is the CIA. So can you imagine just for a second that if that was the opposite, you had a U.S. candidate that was propped up by the FSB, funded by the FSB, propped up, and who would run for the elections. It's unbelievable, right?
Well, the Putin didn't even do anything, and they already accused Trump of being a foreign agent.
Exactly. So I think it's important just to understand that. And what is the real movement? Well, now we can talk about geopolitics in general, but why are they doing this? It's because it's a project of vassalization. So you have Europe, actually. When you look at Europe, there was this project of EU, which was the origin was created by the CIA. So the ones that are actually considered the founder of the EU was Jean Monnet, and there was 2 or 3 more people. They were on the payroll of the CIA, and the idea was to destroy nation states. And then what you have now in the EU is that the power is in Brussels, and is financed. Those leaders elected in Brussels, they're actually listening to the lobbies. And you have this pre-selection system where you have most of the leaders in the EU. They go through the young global young leaders. The World Economic Forum is a vetting system, and many of them they go through Bilderberg. So Bilderberg, how it works is you can actually check on Wikipedia. There's a list of attendees of the Bilderberg group, and you will be astounded. It's just shocking, because you will see that, for example, Bill Clinton, he went to the Bilderberg group 3 years before being elected. Macron, the same. Edouard Philippe, he became prime minister in France, the same. Even Thatcher, before being elected, she went through the vetting system. So we have a complete vassalization of Europe. And that's all for the interest of the U.S. So you have many ways just to do vassalization of your country, and that's what they want to do. The success story is a place like Europe. Success story for them is Ukraine. Now, who are calling the shots are the CIA. But then you had to you needed an actor that could perform the task.
Yeah. This is very extremely interesting for us to understand, because when I look at nowadays politicians in Brazil, I mean, we passed through a very hard process in 2016, more or less. And we are actually trying here in the channel to build a storytelling line at the late 2000s. I mean, from 2008 to early 2010s to more or less 2016. And this period of time, it seems very clear that there was a major operation all around the globe of color revolutions to destabilize governments and, basically to front BRICS. And it was clear that the circling around Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. It was very clear. In fact, it was not very clear at the time, and it's starting to get clear now. Well, at least for the majority, I would say. And this, when I checked some politicians today in Brazil, first thing I check their curricula. So I look at, you check all the globalist lines on their curricula. So they go to fancy North American or European schools. Then they participate to some kind of globalist group. And now that you gave me this number, I already put here on Google because I have to check later to see who are the Brazilian guys on that list. That's something that we are going to start pushing a little stronger here in the channel to start reading the curriculum of these people. And so we had there in 2016, we had the impeachment of our president, Dilma Rousseff at the time, extremely incompetent person, but in any case, an impeachment is never a good thing. It's destabilizing the political system of a country. And just after that, we had Bolsonaro. So Dilma was removed. The vice president was, well, a very tricky guy. Let's put it like that. And after that, we had Bolsonaro, who just raised out of the shadows, more or less out of nowhere. He was a little bit famous of being a trouble picker, but he raised very quickly to the presidency. And then we had the 2 years of there's some shades of gray there, because Bolsonaro was not exactly globalist. He was more Trumpist. Then Trump lost the election. Bolsonaro became fatherless, let's say. And, well, 2 years later comes Lula, that was in jail just a few months before the election. And then he was freed from jail. And, well, now look, Brazil looks like it's going on the BRICS direction. But at the same time, it looks like it's not. That's also a very tricky thing about Brazilian politics. We have to play a very hard game there, because
Marcelo,
we are on the Americas.
Well, this is called, strategic ambiguity, and this is where actually if we want to really analyze the political landscape, we need to take into account that it's about being pragmatic, not emotional, a cold approach. It's a long-term game, and sometimes Chinese, they say you need to be close to your friends, but you need to be even closer to your enemies. So I think we need to look at some long-term plans that are really meaningful when it comes to BRICS, for example. And I think what happened in Ukraine was a decisive moment. We saw a massive shift. I'm going to give you just a few examples. what actually defines right now the position of Brazil is really like this position of non-alignment when it came to Russia. And actually, Brazil actually started considering ditching the dollar for some trading transaction. Mm-hmm. So when you are actually touching on the US dollar hegemony, you are touching, I mean, it's a frontal attack to the US, but they're doing this because you have many other countries doing that. So the same as you have many countries doing this strategic ambiguity. Turkey, those are many countries that are actually in between. And actually, if you want to have leverage in geopolitics, you need to play both sides. You need to play first your own interest, but at the same time, you have to sense what you can do and what you cannot. If you go too far, let's say I'll give you two examples that actually two countries that wanted to ditch the dollar. Because that's one of the biggest elements of this neo-colonialism, which control pretty much the economies of the world. Well, you had Gaddafi. Gaddafi wanted to actually ditch the dollar. He wanted to create an African currency backed by gold. And another one was Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein wanted to trade oil not using US dollar. But back then, he didn't have countries, it was just too early. Countries like Russia and China, they were just too weak. And they could not confront directly the US, so they had to go along. Now, what happened, especially when it happened to Ukraine, you had the world that actually united behind Russia. And I think the collective West was not ready for that. And we see now things that would be unthinkable a few years back, even when it comes to Gaza, what is happening in Palestine. I think that South Africa will never confront directly because it's a very frontal confrontation to the Zionist regime. They would never do that. Africa, the same. Just think for a second. All those ex-French colonies that actually are overthrowing those puppet regime, that would be unthinkable. But now the whole dynamic's shifting. But again, you need to be it's a 5D chess game. So
maybe 670.
Absolutely. So sometimes there is oversimplification. We, and only time will tell us. But if you are a good leader, that's what you should be doing. You see, it's the same as these days. What I hear from the Palestinian issue is like why Iran is not bombing Israel and so on, and this is irrational. It's not this. Especially when you're on the side of raising power and you see that the US and its acolytes, they are declining. So timing is on your side. You need just to keep the status quo, and there's this shift that is happening. This BRICS Global South is building something that is going to change the face of the world, and hopefully, for the best, because the philosophy of BRICS is really about mutual prosperity. It's not about hegemony. It's about really, and I think there's also a culture which is not hegemonic. It's the leadership of China makes it much more rational because China is not. There's no ideology driven behind this. It's not about imposing upon the world the culture or the political system, but it's about how we can have a common destiny. I mean, just think about for a second, having a common destiny. This term, stability, prosperity. Not like we want to. The West is saying we want to export all democracy. No, what democracy? Are you joking? What drugs are you taking? I don't want it? No, but the thing is that they have hijacked the word of democracy. They have hijacked the word of freedom. You have hijacked. Define it. Define democracy. It's not. And actually, you see,
In Brazil, it's very interesting sometimes to hear people talking about this freedom. Well, we have to keep the American style freedom because Brazilians can travel around. The Chinese cannot travel around. Well, the rhetoric is that the Chinese cannot go out of the country and travel around. The Russians, this and all these dictatorships. Well, I'm sorry, but Brazilian people are poor. They can go around. but they can't pay for it. So what's your freedom? While now I see that the Chinese, I have a Chinese friend in Beijing. I've been talking to Carl Zha, to Li Jingjing the other day as well. And the thing that all of them tell me, it's even my friends that have nothing to do with geopolitics. One thing that they tell me in common is that within my lifetime, my life came from a lot of poverty. I would say poverty, not misery, because it was not misery for them. But we came out of a lot of poverty on a situation that even my mother had to make my own clothes and stuff like that, to being an engineer, a PhD engineer in a high research center, having 2 apartments in Beijing, own apartments. How many Brazilians can have one own apartment? If you see the TV, you see the favelas. That's you can call that apartments. That's
Marcello, I'm going to ask you. I mean, can you eat freedom? Can you eat freedom? You can't. You see the just one. You know. If you talk, well, Chinese are very down to earth. They're very pragmatic. You know what they will tell you? If you start this topic of freedom, they will say, money is freedom. Money is freedom. Marcello, you got the pesetas. You can take a flight and I go. You know what? If you have money, you don't even care about politics. You have 10 passports and I'm gone. I have that freedom. The real freedom, it's money. It's prosperity. You need to have the foundation. First of all, we are all human beings. What do we want? We want stability. We want dignity. We want to put food on the table. Really, that is actually what unites us. Yeah. We want to have a healthcare. We want our children to live longer than we live. That's basic human rights. Those are the foundations. So this is why I object when we come with those talk about, well, Africa. Oh, let's give them let's have freedom. Let's have a democracy. But what they mean? Let's have democracy. It's like Western style democracy, which is a system of control. While China really, what they focus was really, you need to. First of all, it's a democracy in itself. It is a democracy with Chinese characteristic, the same as socialist with Chinese characteristic. But ultimately, it's a system that delivers results, the way it's constructed. And actually, there's a check and balance. And there is one benchmark, which is the most important. You see, in the West, we make the mistake that we say, oh, you know what? This is my ballot. I put in my vote in the ballot, and that's democracy. That's it. 5 years I'm a citizen. I've done what I should be doing for the democracy. I'm a good citizen. You know what? That move doesn't make it a democracy. And actually if you want to go further into the details of the philosophy of democracy, the real action of democracy is not electing, is voting. When you vote for law. Electing someone, it's giving you trust. For the next 5 years, you're giving up your democratic rights. I'm repeating. Electing is giving up your democratic right to vote. So if you wanted to have real impact on your country, you should be able 3-4 times a year to vote for the laws. Why would you have someone that you elect and then he's going to do whatever he wants with no check and balance? You see, so those are basic stuff. And ultimately, very important, Marcello, and this is what they did in France. The yellow vest, the movement of yellow vest in France was very interesting. And they never mentioned this in international media, but the main thing that they wanted to do was they wanted a referendum rights. Referendum is direct democracy where you can actually overthrow your government. If they're not complying with, if they don't deliver, you can say, well, you know what, you promise, I elected you, you promised something, you're not delivering, or you're not acting democratically. I can overthrow the government.
That's more or less in the Chinese, the election, but fiscalization process. that you have the yearly voting for, not voting for a regional candidate, but giving a what's it called, a vote.
Yeah. Absolutely, but there's actually a rating system. The problem is people, they think that it's dictatorship. Actually, it's a system of meritocracy. So exactly. You get into the system if you have you've been to jail, you cannot go there. There's a pre-selection to get into the CPC, and then it's the system of meritocracy. Meritocracy is merit, the word inside. That means that if you deliver, if you are good, you can get up the ladder of the power, and you are voted by your peers. So if you are not good, you go nowhere. So when you see in the West, you have people with no political experience, like Vivek, for example. Vivek is a billionaire. He goes into Vivek Ramaswamy in the US. He goes into politics. He's funding his own campaign, and he's got donors, and he's telling people what they want to hear. Why? Because he has studied the market, and he knows that if he has this position, this topic and that topic, he's going to have votes. And there's something which is really important too, is that when you have there's a strong correlation between your exposure on the media and the rate of votes you get. The more exposure you get, the more you get voted. So it's like simple stuff. So what they did in France was they actually understood that the rule of the game was written by the elites. So if you are playing in a game that is already written, that the rule of the game was written by the elites actually are controlling the outcome. It doesn't matter. Actually you playing in a rigged system. What you need to do is to rewrite the rule of the game, and the people need to do that. Because you see, the rule of the game should be actually written by you to protect you from the elites. If you give that right to the elites, you're supposed to protect you from them. So those are the basic things. So democracy is sovereignty, no money interference. The people need to write the rule of the game, and you have to have neutral media. If you really want to go into like the details of Western style democracy.
Yes. Since you're Swiss, it's been a while that you don't live in Switzerland anymore. But I lived in Switzerland for 2 years in Geneva, and the system seemed very interesting to look at. I mean, it seemed complex to understand, but there was always the referendum for basic subjects, regional subjects, national subjects. There was always some kind of referendum. My friend who was Swiss, he was always receiving the letters at home for voting and everything. Very, very interesting thing. And plus you have that, seven presidents, right? You elect 7 presidents.
We shift every year, actually. The presidents shift every year, yeah.
Yeah. It was not supposed to be the topic of the conversation today, but could you explain a little bit how it works? Because it seemed very interesting to understand that for me at least.
Well, the whole idea of the 7, those, I don't know how you call it, we call it le Conseil Fédéral. It's a federal council. And basically you have 7, so they have different portfolio. And every year you change the president of the confederation. And it is proportional to the votes, the party, the party, one party gets two representative. There's I don't know the mix, but there's a mix. And they call it la formule magique, la formula mágica, there's a formula, and actually they respect that. So a few years ago there was a shift in politics, and somehow they got together and they say, well, we need to respect that, we need to change this formula. So it's a system actually of compromises, which actually democracy should be about compromises, you see. Otherwise, what you can have, for example, in the US, it's so divided that you have, in reality, what we call the mob rule. You have 51% that are going to win, and it's going to be at the expense of the 49%.
Oh, the 49.
And there's also, we need to remember also that Well, this is for Switzerland. So I'm just going to switch. I don't want to switch too much, but let's keep on Switzerland. So what we have is it's a mix between indirect democracy, so meaning that you elect representative and they are going to represent you. And then at the same time, you have direct democracy where if you have a certain amount of signature, you can do a referendum. And actually you can vote yourself directly for laws. So sometimes the people that you represent, that represent you, are going to ask the people. They say, well, there's a vote, there's a law that we need to pass, but maybe we'd like to ask the people to vote for that. Imagine how, but because otherwise in other system they take us like kids. Here they say, well, you are responsible and you are intelligent enough to be able to give a judgment on laws. So what happens is that the population gets educated on the law and the whole process. It's inclusive. They say, well, you want to be part of that. And then what people do, they study about the law, they debate, and then they vote directly. So it's a very interesting system. And actually, Swiss people are very proud of that system. And I would say, if you wanted to measure the metrics of legitimacy of a system, I think it's the satisfaction level. That gives legitimacy to the system. Yes. So going back to China, there's a Harvard University study survey that says that 95% of Chinese love their system. And I confirm, I don't need to go into a poll. And Harvard University...
Because they are obliged to.
And it's interesting that, 300 million Chinese, they go abroad every year. And you know what? Yep. 300 million Chinese, they come back to China because life is good in China. Yeah. And they... So it's important. So I like to compare like different systems. So I was lucky. Actually, I was a politician back in Switzerland. I just was back for 1 year, and I joined the election, and then basically, but it was just local. Very interesting. Local is it's much more interesting when it's local. There's a community, and actually there's no labels. Your label is not important. And actually, whenever it comes to political ideology, I think the most important for me is self-determination. That's the most important. So people should actually define their own destiny. But when it comes to ideology, I think it's important not to put people into boxes because you see, because there's lots of ignorance. And we enter into a divide and control system once we put ourselves into boxes. You see, I'll give you an example. You see, for example, communists, and I'm not like, I'm not saying I'm communist or so on, but let's say communist. Most people were brainwashed by Hollywood saying, "Oh, communist is bad," especially the U.S. Communist was made illegal, and they see communists as a system of oppression and so on. So, if you were to define communist to someone, you want to give the idea. What you can do, you can use other terms. You can say, share prosperity. So you see, let's say you want to, because otherwise you put yourself into a box. Now, if you talk to most people, you say, can we do share prosperity? Share this. We have gains of productivity. Can we share better those gains of productivity? Well, guess what? 99% of the people, they would say, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. But the system itself loves to put ourselves into labels because it's a divide and control system. Yeah, you see, they need to divide us.
For them to keep you in a certain box, so the other side can look at you. Oh, you're a communist, or you're I don't know, liberal. Yeah, you're progressive. You're whatever. All these mini. Divisions, all these mini divisions that we have, and it's becoming more and more mini divisions. So you can divide for very small part of population for each division. So everybody hates each other.
Yeah, absolutely. But you see, my point is actually this is the same at the local level. But it is the same also in geopolitics. So in reality, Marcelo, it's a problem of, the real problem is the 99% against the 1%. You see, if you can overcome that, we all unite, and they don't want that. Because you see, there's a 1%, which is the 1% actually create those divide. So let's say if I was an elite and I see the 99%, I want to control them. What do? I'm going to issue, or when it's a conservative society, let's divide them over identity issues, black, white, lesbian, gay, abortion. Let's put in abortion. We are further dividing people. And guess what? You are going to put 100 boxes and people are going to fight each other and so on. And then you have the 1% watching them. And guess what? He's laughing. He's like, this is working. And I'm going to finance people that are going to enter the elections. I control the media, and it's going to be two clowns, one clown red, one clown blue. And they are going to have this illusion of free choice, but I give them only two choices. And actually, the media will tell them how to vote, because I do control the media. It's the same. You see, it's what Noam Chomsky called, manufacturing consent. You actually shape the brain of people. You see, same as you see Macron in France. Macron, before even telling people that he wanted to be a candidate, he was on all the newspaper. He was everywhere. He's a genius. He's the Mozart of finance. He's amazing. He haven't even declared himself to be candidate. So you have already prepared the mind of people. And then they fabricate a poll saying, 55% of the people would love to have him. So, when you think like this and you didn't even know him, you're like, he must be good.
Yeah. Exactly.
The illusion of free choice.
Exactly. It's exactly, we punch this here in the channel, like I wouldn't say daily, but in every opportunity that we have. It's the perception. The reality doesn't matter. What matters is the perception of reality.
Absolutely. And it's sad when you think about the West. We are treated. Politics is treated like a product. What they do is that they do their own marketing. What is the market? What people want, And but in reality, the way they say is that what do people want to hear? You see, what they want to hear. But it's not about what they want, because once I'm elected, I can do whatever I want. And you see, because there's a system of election, they have a legitimate right of force towards you. Yep. You see, if you are a dictatorship, you're hitting your people. It makes it extremely brutal because you are a dictatorship. This is why actually sometimes dictatorship don't hit people, because if you are a dictatorship, you hit people, then you are evil. But then if you are a democracy, you hit people and you cannot complain. You voted for me, right? What are you complaining about? You voted for me, but you killed the yellow vest. You killed 13 people. But you know what? I'm doing this for your good. And you actually, why are you complaining? You voted for me.
You told me I could do this.
Exactly. So they have the legitimate use of force, while in reality, and they are the real police state. In China, a policeman is a servant. You know what? I've seen cases in China where citizens hit the police and the police doesn't hit back. They don't dare to hit back because you're supposed to serve them. So sometimes maybe he's drunk, you're not going to hit him.
Yeah.
Well, in the West, I tell you, in the West, if my subconscious mind, when I see a policeman, especially in France, those guys, it's extremely aggressive. And I'll give you some examples, really. When you look at, you see, when we talk about police states, China per capita, the prison population is 5 times less than in the US. Can you imagine that? I mean, just process. And I like, you know, Marcelo, I like to be factual because, you know, I mean, once you need to come with figures. And you see, this is a good example on how actually on the paper.
It's interesting. It's important that you mentioned the fact that it's per capita, because sometimes what you're gonna read is that China has a huge jail system, but they have 1.4 billion, not 300 million. And if you compare tits with tats, you're gonna see, we have a lot of people. Statistically, we're gonna have more troublemakers. In general, I mean, if you look around mankind, you're going to see that more or less all peoples behave more or less the same. You're going to have more or less the same amount of troublemakers. You're going to have the natural troublemakers, let's say like that. Then you're going to increase these and decrease that depending on social issues and all that. But if you have 1.4 million people labeled Chinese, they are in China, they are all responsibility of one single state, not an entire continent or something like that. It's one single state. Then you can say, this state has too many prisons or too many prisoners. But per capita, you know, it's less than the advanced society.
No, absolutely. So I think we need to. I do a lot of study. Whenever I go into a topic, I go into like the statistics, and I like to really dig into this because then you can back it up. And there are many ratios. Well, what I see is. And that saddens me because you see, I don't necessarily have I'm not necessarily what I define like a pro-China. It's not this. Actually, what I'm doing is that I've been living in China for 30 years. I learned the language, the culture, and China has been good to me. But ultimately, I'm still, no matter what, I feel still I'm a foreigner. I still love my country. Where I feel bad is basically I see a declining of the West, but it's not only it's a moral decline in general. It's a decline in terms of democracy. It's a decline economic. We don't have this shared prosperity, and I feel that we could actually just try to learn from other countries and maybe work together rather than just being confrontational. But that requires humility. You see what we have in the West mostly, and that's one of the reasons that I started speaking out, because I felt that the Western media were unfair when it came to China. But in the West, what you have is you have 4 levels when it comes to knowledge. You don't know that you don't know. That's the lowest level. When you don't know that you don't know, it's because people speak, but they don't know that they don't know. That's the worst. Wisdom starts when you know that you don't know. Can you imagine? You know that you don't know.
Exactly.
Then miracles happen because people start shutting their mouths. You see my point? Know that you don't know. Then you like this and you start listening.
And listening.
You go through.
That's what one of our biggest proposal on the channel. It's not to learn per se, is to unlearn.
Absolutely.
And that's the hardest part, because learning from you, it's easy. You're gonna talk, I'm gonna absorb the knowledge. But if you say something that I was previously I learned different, it's very hard to, and that especially if I defended this for a long time in my life.
Oh yeah.
It's very hard to stay put for a second and listen to you. The brain shuts immediately. The brain shuts. They say, okay, this guy's an idiot. I'm not going to listen to him anymore. That's what happens inside our mind. And this is one thing that we are trying the best to. It's personally very hard, not only to give this idea to the audience, but internally for myself, sometimes to listen to something that I don't fully agree with for a long time. it's hard to swallow. I'm going to propose you something, sir. We are reaching 1 hour. What do you say we make a quick intermission, 5 minutes?
Absolutely.
And
Sounds
we come
good.
back. Okay. We'll be right back here. Okay. And we're back. Yes. So, all right. So, Angelo, let's go back a little bit to the color revolutions in China. As I said before, I'm very interested in that period of late 2010s and late 2000 and early 2010s. And when I was searching a little bit, there was a lot of civil unrests in China and around. I mean, the Tibetan unrest, the Uyghurs, the Urumqi riots, the Wukan, and then we have the Hong Kong, three Hong Kong protests in 2011, 2014, and 2019-20. You were part on these Hong Kong protests. Could you explain a little bit to us about what happened, why it happened, and how was taking place in the city?
So, well, China has been aggressed by the West through those hybrid warfare through time. So I mentioned before 1989 Tiananmen Square. Mm-hmm. Then if you look at the map, they've been trying to encircle. So around China, you had already like the countries around China in Burma, Myanmar, all around China. Mm-hmm. They tried to put puppet regime to contain China. And then when you look at the map, they started in Tibet. Probably very early on, they actually they managed to get the Dalai Lama to be on the payroll of the CIA. So even all those years, he admitted actually when I read I think a book from his brother said clearly that probably the biggest mistake the Dalai Lama did was to take the money from the CIA. So then he went to Dharamsala in India. And then also what they tried to do was in Xinjiang, they tried to organize the separatist movements. And that was also financed by the NED, so the CIA, the rebranded CIA. And also in China, in Hong Kong, what they did was before the handover, in 97, they actually started planting the seeds for color revolution. So you had plenty of agents that were there. And what they did was there's no national security law. In the handover, what they did was a mini constitution. They called it the basic law. And within that mini constitution, there was an article called Article 23, which was a national security law. It was supposed to be enacted. But because they had so many NGOs and people that were actually, working as agents in Hong Kong, they could never pass that law. And it took time just to pass that law. So what they did was to try, in 2014, they started like this what they call Occupy Central, where they occupied the central of Hong Kong, and they started protesting. And the whole idea was not about democracy. It was really getting funding from the West and actually trying to subvert the government, just to overthrow the government. So in 2014, they failed, and they tried again in 2019. In 2019, the way it started, there's always a legitimate grievance. There's always something that is hijacked. That's how it starts. For example, in Maidan Revolution in Ukraine, it was supposed to be an agreement related to an agreement between Europe and Ukraine. And then it becomes something which is very different. They overthrow the government and it becomes something nationalistic. It's the same. So every time there's a legitimate grievance and the cause is being hijacked. Hong Kong, there was two things. One was in general, income disparities. The system is extremely capitalist. It's ruthless in Hong Kong. Really, it's one of the molars. Working conditions are very tough. Living conditions are tough, especially housing. And so in 2019, there was a case. They wanted to do an extradition law because there was somebody that killed someone in.
A guy that killed his girlfriend, his pregnant girlfriend in Taiwan.
Yeah, in Taiwan, and he was in Hong Kong, and they wanted to establish an extradition law just to solve those cases. But when you have an extradition law, it's very simple. You need to have the same standard in both sides. So what is a crime here should be a crime here, and then you get together and you find ways to do extradition. And here they manipulated this information. They said, oh, if we sign this law, maybe China will ask political people, make some political prisoners from Hong Kong, like people that don't agree with China, to be transferred to China. I mean, it was just completely absurd. So that's how they started, and my experience on the ground was extremely nasty. It was extremely racially. It was very racist. At some point, they turned the conflict into anti-China conflict. So basically, you have many people in Hong Kong. The local language is Cantonese. But many people also speak Mandarin here. You have a small minority that speak Mandarin. So because they hate China, they would actually randomly beat up people speaking Mandarin. But when I say beating up, it's nasty. It's 10 people beating up a woman or whatever. And it was dozens every day for 1 year. Can you imagine? Oh, wow. Dozens every day for 1 year. So in my case, for example, with my partner and my son, we didn't dare to speak Mandarin in the streets. So just imagine. And the same people, they were actually advocating for freedom and democracy.
And at the same time, no aggression toward Westerns.
So Westerners, they would never touch Westerners. So in my case, when I saw that the way they were behaving, and I saw many Western agents, CIA agents, they were teaching kids how to throw petrol bombs. They were actually paying kids. There's a program at the university where they would hand out, because the funding was everywhere. So there was a program in the university where they were giving $50 to kids to go to the protest. And it was for 1,200 kids, 1,200 kids, $50. And the way they manipulated that was that we give you $50 and you have to fill in a survey. But it was on purpose. They say, because they need to find an excuse. Why would you pay $50 to go to a protest? So they knew that by sending one kid, they would have 3 or 4 friends that would go with them. Mm-hmm. So now it's no more 1,200. Now it's like 5,000-6,000 kids that go into, and then you get them politicized. Before they were like playing PlayStation. Then they go to a protest and they're like, oh, the protest is saying, oh, we want freedom, we want democracy. And then you politicize the kids. And they found out that those kids in the survey, they would go back to the same protest. So you see the whole idea. So, and then additional to that, I saw this whole mess because I knew, I had learned about Maidan revolution in Ukraine. And in Hong Kong, they were putting everywhere around the city, open air, free movies, documentary of the Hong Kong revolution, the Maidan revolution.
But for sure, not the one from Oliver Stone, the one from Netflix. No, of course
not. Exactly, the one from Netflix. So the kids, they were saying that, and when you see that, you feel, it's you touching the emotional. You're not, because how it works, you work on the emotional level. You don't work on the rational level. Yeah. Yeah. If you, especially when you're targeting kids, and it's very nasty because kids are, they're not necessarily rational. They move by emotions, and so that's what they did. And so I felt that I had the responsibility to speak out, but to speak out for one thing, and unique thing was the foreign meddling, because my approach was, you shouldn't have foreign interference. And then once you solve the sovereignty of the place, then I have no word to say. Then it's an internal affair. You see, yeah. And I saw it was turning really bad. It was extremely nasty. And so for 1 year, I had to stop to go out in family. I was restricted to where I was going. I was because it was getting dangerous. I had death threats. It was very nasty. So that's the story of Hong Kong, and then later on, what happens is that they finally managed to have a national security law, So you see, Hong Kong population is 8 million people. You had 2 million people that signed a petition to have a national security law.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it became more peaceful once we had that. But you see, the problem is that in those color revolution, you don't need to have many people. You know, you can overthrow government. Like in Maidan in Ukraine, it was a few thousand nationalists that overthrew the government for a country of 40 million people. So you see, you need a very small, very violent minority, because the majority is passive. You see, the majority of people, they're not politicized. And that's how color revolution are very dangerous, because then ultimately it's a very, very small minority that can put a huge mess.
Exactly. At the same time, it's a small minority, but you know, if you put them all together in a place, they look like a mob, a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And then again, the perception changes. The pacifists or whoever is at home watching TV and looks at that, okay, we need to do something. We need to change something. Well, I'm not going to the streets, but next time on the elections, you're gonna see from me. And that democratically takes down a government. And if it doesn't get democratically, then things get ugly.
But it's very interesting, because the same color revolution, they are advocating for democracy, and they are doing exactly the opposite, because they shut down dissent voices. So in my case, they shut me down. They were threatening me because I had different opinion. If you are really for democracy, you should be willing to listen to what I have to say, but not be willing to kill me because I don't agree with your position. And that's how they are. They say, we want freedom and democracy. And actually, you need to be really careful. They have one thing in common. There's very often it's like the face, the logo is very similar. It's always the same kind of marketing. And then they say, freedom and democracy. You know what? It's not a slogan. It's not a slogan which is organic, freedom. People, average people, even the French, the French Revolution, we have to go back to history, but the French Revolution, people, they went into the street because of the price of bread. People, who they were actually, the weapons, the guns, it was given by the bourgeoisie, the rich, the elites, because there was a king and you had a new rich. The new rich, they used the poor and they managed to get the price of bread to go higher, and then they gave the poor the weapons because they wanted to take over the power of the king. So in France, the French Revolution was an exchange from one king to hundreds of kings. And at the end of the day, so you had at the end a revolution, and you had all the poor people with the guns. Now what they did, the rich, they said, oh, you know what, we'd better get back the guns. So they paid the poor to get back the guns, because otherwise, the poor would know that we've been fooled. But very often, the poor never went out for democracy. They always went out for tangible things, for the bread.
Exactly. That's a real point. We were talking. Sometimes I get lost if we talk just before coming online, but or just after. But the thing about freedom in Brazil, that's a point. I mean, you got. Oh, you need to have freedom. Well, you don't have money to have freedom. You don't have money to have freedom. What can you do? You cannot get. You cannot buy a car. You cannot buy a house. You cannot travel abroad. What's your freedom? You cannot travel inside the country. Where's your freedom? Where's your freedom? You're free? No, you're not. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And as you said, 300 million Chinese in the last 8 years that I'm living abroad. I've seen the rise of Chinese tourists around Europe. And that's what you say. I'm not seeing the rise of Chinese immigrants around Europe. I see rise of immigrants from all over the planet, not Chinese. They come, they take pictures, they go to museums, they see the open air museum that is Europe, and they go back to Beijing and to those beautiful lights on the buildings and what I call the true colors of 21st century. What I say is that, you remember, you're probably a bit older than me, but you remember when you used to see movies and TV documentaries about New York or Tokyo. Those are the future cities, all those lights, everything is very beautiful. Well, they look like future from Back to the Future movie now.
Yeah.
And when I look at Beijing and, big cities in China, that's 21st century. That's 21st
Absolutely.
century. And Europe, I love being in Europe. It's a very peaceful place, very calm. I like the calmery of Europe, but it's an open-air museum. Even the Europeans don't like many times this because they have problems of infrastructure that cannot be solved because you have some very ancient ruin, or here in Italy is a very good example. In Rome is a beautiful city. I love going to Rome. But the Romans, they want a subway system, a metro system. And every 10 meters they dig, they find some ancient ruin or some, old pots, and they have to stop, and they don't go forward with the infrastructure, growing of the city.
No, absolutely. I think there's some very interesting points just to compare. But most Chinese really, everything's happening in China. And what I advise people is really, it's I think that when you go to China, let's say you spend the first 24 hours and you go to Shanghai, those 24 hours are going to change your perception of China for your whole life. So usually I take the example of going to Shanghai. So when you go to Shanghai, you fly into one of the most modern airports in the world. Then you are going to take the fastest train in the world to the center. So 15 minutes, 400 kilometers per hour. It's just amazing. And then you are going to be in Pudong area. It's Manhattan on steroids, much more modern. And you'll be like the slap in the face. It's a slap in the face. And you feel very humbled. And then you go out in the evening, you're like, you know what? It's everything the most modern. And you realize that, you got the cool side of China that they never show you, in movies. In movies, the Chinese is always like someone who's working in a dark place, is working like crazy, is in a restaurant, working in a restaurant. The same as Russian. The Russian, we portray the Russian as either mafia guy or prostitute, all those stereotypes. When, you go to China, it's going to be humbling. And I want to go back to my experience in China was really, and especially we talk about 30 years ago. 30 years ago, China was poor. And I'm going to be very honest, I had a very arrogant attitude because I came with my Western lenses and I was like, you're pointing out, this is like this is like that, And then up to the day that I realized that I didn't understand China. And then this is when actually my relationship with China was different because I started respecting the place and trying to learn from the place. And then you do the immersion and slowly you realize that, a lifetime will not be enough to learn about China. And then there's and also you feel that there's a deep history. It's extremely deep. Everything, the culture that you experience, all the reaction, the interactions you have with Chinese. Well, that's because it's linked to their old history, and also in geopolitics. Why China is doing the way it is doing now, because it's extremely mature and very adult approach when it comes to geopolitics. It's very subtle, very and also a very scientific approach too. Chinese, they're very pragmatic, but also very scientific. The leadership is very, leadership, most of the leaders in China are all PhDs in science, math, engineering, and technology. So there's no BS. It's no BS, it's no acting. The only thing is that from Western lenses, it looks boring because it's scientific. It's scientific. It's not like, like you have those leaders. I mean, maybe
It's not like a soap opera, a telenovela.
No, but they're not there to inspire you. Yes, they are going to tell you some slogan and so on, but they are going to tell you very bluntly, this is what we are going to do. Those are the problems we have. This is what we are going to do. There's a 5-year plan, and actually they deliver. In the West, it's like I'm going to tell you about, let's build back better. You know what I mean? What is it? 3 years ago, they said we are going to do a project, multi-billion-dollar project, big, bad, better. They said it, they talk about it for a few months, and then it's gone. Have you heard about this anymore? No. China, there was a project, Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
Now it's going to be multi-trillion dollars of infrastructure project linking all Eurasia. And they do it. And they do it. It's expanding. This is actually, this might turn into one of the largest infrastructure project in human history. But they don't need to brag about it. They do it. It's not about talk. Blah, blah, blah. No, it's about doing. It's about doing. And even when they do it, they're not going to brag about it. They're not going to say, they're going to flex the muscle. I did it. No, but they do it, it's just normal. Once they do it, you know what they say? They're not going to brag about it. It's like, well, let's work on the next step, And I like this whole approach. I mean, for Westerners, it might seem like slogans, but they really mean it.
That's a good cut for the channel. Projects against promises.
Yeah. It's what we call a.
But that's true. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative, which I don't know if initially was, I would call it small. It was already huge, just to have some belt road going from Africa all the way through Asia, East Asia, Eurasia, through Europe. And today it's, even in this last BRICS summit where we had the new members joining the BRICS, you can see the strategic on logistics, on geographical logistics all around there. I mean, you have Egypt with the Suez Canal. You have, you have the perspective of Indonesia in the future to block the Indo-Pacific entrance. Well, not to block, to avoid blocking the Indo-Pacific entrance passage. Well, you had, unfortunately, but you had Argentina, and you have the Cape Horn, and the maritime routes that could go around the Cape Horn. Well, now that's on hold, but we also have some projects in Brazil because Brazil does not have Pacific Ocean land shores. But there are projects to connect from, I don't remember if from Peru, all the way to São Paulo via the Amazon River, and then we should do some more railroads in Brazil as well. So you can see the entire connections, and on the way to Africa, you had the Ethiopia that basically controls that horn down there. It doesn't have a sea, but it controls the horn more or less. It's a big country that could control the horn, and you have the passage to the Red Sea. Plus, if it goes all the way to West Africa, and now as you mentioned, the West Africans, the former French the French countries, the French African countries. What I saw about the Belt and Road is that it should cross all the Sahel area, all the way to Western Africa, and from there you can go to Brazil as well. So it's basically really going all around the globe of the earth. I mean, it's not all infrastructure, but as a logistical point of view, it's complete independence on commerce from the average West routes that we have.
Yeah, and it's also win-win. If you think about the whole idea, it's win-win. So China, the whole approach of China is a multiple purpose. So one of them is actually strategic. They need to have alternative routes to not to be to have blockades. So the risk of China is to have a blockade on, especially on the Malacca Straits, the same as the U.S. did for Japan. They asphyxiated Japan in World War II, and this is why Japan actually attacked in Pearl Harbor. So China wants to actually avoid that because that's how the West could contain China. So what they are doing, they have alternative routes, and they're mainly connecting through inland. So there's inland connections. So they hedge their bets. And also China is a trade surplus. So when you have a trade surplus, it means that you are selling more than what you buy, and you end up with a US dollar trade surplus reserves. So they have cash in dollars, and if you keep that cash, it's US dollar. It's not meant to be repaid, right? It's not tangible. So they are reinvesting into tangible assets. So you see, it's hedging against the trade surplus. So you build roads, and Chinese. You know what they say? Chinese, they say, if you want to become rich, you start building a road. It's very smart, because you are going to connect with other people, and you are going to do trades. So you see, and now when you start building roads, especially in Eurasia, you have many countries that are landlocked. Landlocked meaning they have no access to the sea. So now you build a road. Let's say you build a road through Mongolia. You are starting to get Mongolia more connected to the outside world. And then at the same time, you have countries with resources. China needs resources, but those countries don't even have roads. For example, in Africa, you have big mines, let's say Congo, but you don't have even a road that goes to the mine. So they are building the infrastructure. But at the same time, those projects, there's a process. So if you're a country, you need financing. It's not China that is going around saying, well, we want to build roads. You have a project, you go to China, and China check at your business plan, your project, is it viable or not? They don't want to invest into a project which is going to be a failure and is going to put you into trouble. So it needs to be viable. And then what China provides compared to the IMF and the World Bank, they provide half the rates of what the IMF and the World Bank gives, and I'm quoting Reuters, and sometimes it's even lower. Additional to that is not short-term loan. If it's short-term loans, it's difficult. It's hard to manage. It's long-term loan. And another difference compared to the World Bank and the IMF is that China has no strings attached, meaning they don't say, well, you know what? Like they did in Europe, the Marshall Plan. They say, well, we lend you that money, but you have to accept that 50% of your movies are Hollywood movies. Or you have to accept that we actually have those NGOs. Or you need to actually change your legal system. Or you need to be part of the ICC, which is Western control, International Criminal Court. You see, so it goes against your own sovereignty. And the IMF and the World Bank, what they do is a debt trap. If you get bankrupt, you cannot repay, then they go into your country, they say, well, I can help you out, but it's the shark loan. It's like the mafia. So you have to change your government or whatever, or you have to accept, LGBT stuff and all this liberal ideology.
Human rights and all the stuff.
Exactly. So it's a different approach, but much more respectful, and it's helping me. It's a win-win. Additional to that, so it's not only it's infrastructure, but it's also schools, hospital, and so on. And because when you look at the problematic of the global South, is that they don't have the basic infrastructure to be industrialized. Foundation for industry, you need to have roads, you need to have electricity. But you know what? In Africa, they don't have electricity. So you need to provide the minimum. Once they have that, then you are. It's going to be very powerful. Just have those basic things. roads, schools, hospital, electricity, and then provide the tools to be self-sufficient. In China, I think they have a genuine attitude just to help out, but they know they care about their own interests, so they know that this is going to be good for China. But at the same time, they know that this is by lifting up the global South, it's also they become political partners.
Exactly.
So what Chinese think is that the West, they want to control you either through weapons, through NGOs, by threatening you, sanctions and so on. China is the opposite. This is the stick, China is the carrot, saying, well, you know what? You actually have leverage over engagement. So you see, when you want to, you can choose, the attitude. Sometimes, let's say you're not my friend, but I want to influence you because I don't want to, I want to not control you, but influence you. When I start trading with you, if I start trading with you, I start to have interaction, then we have a common purpose. We have common interest, and then we have leverage over each other. Exactly. And that's the whole idea. This is why actually China is extremely respected in the whole global South, because it has this attitude, and it's an attitude of non-interference. What they say is live and let live. See, Marcello, I'm not going to your home and saying how you should behave with your family, right?
Exactly.
What is in my home stays in my home, but then maybe we have some common ground, and the idea is look for what unites us and set aside the differences.
Put it in a building. I mean, you have 10 apartments. As you said, you're not going to enter each one of those apartments and say, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. Your decor is not nice or whatever. But at the same time, you have the stairs that connect you, and the elevator and the garage and all these parts that are public. They are mutual interest. So you want a clean stair, then you get together with everybody and say, look, we need a clean stair. The bills are coming too high for the building. Let's try to make something different. Well, maybe there someone will say, well, I'm not in favor of these. That's another argument. But the thing is that you have a common purpose. One thing that then what I'm going to ask, and that's a concern. There, of course, the approach is very different, and maybe probably the purpose is very different on China compared to the West, to the colonial powers as we know them. So what I see, for example, I see in Africa some African leaders concerned about this, like, okay, let's not change one colonizer for another. Although the approach is very different, China's approach is very different. Would it be possible that in the future China could use the economic power to some kind of, or let me rephrase that. I didn't like the question. Would China be okay with other powers raising as a competition? As example, India is just next to China and right now has just surpassed China in population and has an immense economic growth. Would China be okay living in this multipolarity of this economic multipolarity? That's a question, a future question, I would say, like that. But the mindset, when I read Confucius, and the mindset seems very different and sometimes strange to our comprehension, to our Western comprehension. How do you? Did you get my question? I think
I absolutely. And I think this is a fantastic question. Fantastic. I think, you know what, I will rephrase maybe even more. I would say, would China behave the same as the imperialistic power? I think this is an important question that people need to have an answer. And to be honest, if China was to behave, if I would sense just for 1 second, one small probability that China would be threatening and be hegemonic and be brutal force, I would not even, back China or, but because of Chinese history, we need to go back to history and to understand the culture. You see, for example, China for thousands of years has been the largest economic power. You see, the West has been for 200-300 years hegemonic, but it is because China and India missed the Industrial Revolution. In the case, and they were contained too. There was the Opium War. India was contained by the British Empire. So in reality, you see, when the Cristoforo Colombo, he discovered America, in reality, China had a fleet that was, I don't know, maybe 100 times larger than all the Western powers combined. China was such a power. It was just amazing. But the way they were doing, they were not actually invading countries. What they were doing, they actually established trade cities, free trade zones. So basically they agreed with the countries in Southeast Asia, and basically it was a tribute system. So, an exchange of goods, and it was a tribute system. But China, if it wanted, it could have invaded, all Asia. It could have, go into expansions. But China was not interested. And China back then was very self-centered. One of the reasons that, you see, China was so advanced, then when it looked at the rest of the world, even Europe, it was like, well, there's nothing where, they don't have anything to bring us. And, in terms of innovation, no, but, in terms of innovation, China was much more advanced. And also, so China was never interested in expansion, and you need to just think about, you see the Great Wall that China has. Well, it was because of being protecting yourself from the invaders from the north. You see, so historically, China has never been interested in conquest, but they've been interested in trade, and that's very Chinese. They work hard. They like tangible stuff. It's just those satisfactions. They like to work hard. They like to see physical results. They feel these things about accomplishment. And they are self-centered. You see, when you look at the characters of China, one character is the middle kingdom. Middle kingdom, that's what we say, 中国, China. And because it's self-centered, they really believe that they were the country of the middle of the world. And they have, it's a continent in itself. Over 50 nationalities. It's already hard work. They want to stabilize that. That's what they want, and they want to bring prosperity. And that's the whole attitude.
Already too much work to take care of their own 1.4 million people and all the different regions. Why would they want to take care of others as well?
And when you look at the elites, the government is ruled by the people. The problem is that average people are not interested in conquest. Average people, they want to have a better living. So culturally, it is not the culture for that. And you see, the whole attitude is against intervention. So there's no meddling. So this is why people are frustrated. They say, well, why China is not doing more for Palestinians? Well, it will not do that. Conflict has to be dealt locally and legally too. So you see, and we have an example here. When you look at the ICG, when it comes to Palestinians, it's a test for the whole world order. You see, the world order is the UN, and you have those codes. You have ICC, ICJ. If if the ICJ doesn't deliver, and if the UN, there's no legal, they don't comply with the legal stuff, that it's going to lose credibility. And what could China do? The BRICS could do is actually to create parallel institutions. And that's what they're starting. If you think about BRICS, they're doing BRICS, but they're doing the banking. And I wouldn't be surprised that, let's say, if ICJ continue to be Western control, especially like the UN, the Security Council, which is Western control. Well, I could imagine that there is a parallel institution that are created through BRICS, and BRICS expanding, making the UN existing institution irrelevant.
That's I will not say a conflict of ideas between me and Davidson, who unfortunately was not able to be present today. He just wrote me a couple of hours ago. It's not a conflict of ideas, just two different perceptions that kind of leads to the same output. And one thing that Davidson believes is that, and if you look at it, it makes perfect sense. I also believe in that part, is that what the BRICS, that mostly by China and Russia, who are very present, very powerful at this moment. What BRICS is doing is trying to legally take over, and I would say take over with quotes, the UN. But when I say take over with quotes, what I mean is that, okay, let's clean the room from all the meddling and all the corruption and all that. Let's make it to work. Let's make the United Nations to work. But if it does not work, if it does not change, that's what I believe is going to happen. That's the BRICS. We are going to have the BRICS Olympic Games, even the Olympic Games, and I'm going further. You're going to have the UN, you're going to have the Olympic Games, you're going to have the FIFA World Cup. All that is going to be changed. All that is going to, or they adapt to the new reality. All these institutions adapt to the new reality and accept the fact that they cannot continue working. And I will give you an example about the FIFA World Cup. I don't know if you saw in Netflix, 1 week before the World Cup in Qatar last year, 1 week they put out a documentary called the FIFA schemes or corruption in FIFA or something like that, and showing all the 40 years before, and they show all the World Cups, the Moscow World Cup, the Qatari World Cup, the World Cup in Brazil, all the problems and corruptions that pop out, but they don't show the World Cup in France. They don't show the World Cup in Spain. They don't show the World Cup in the United States, where Brazil was champion, by the way. They don't show any of that. They do not show. So basically what they show on this documentary is that, oh, look, FIFA was corrupt for 40 years or 50 years or since it began. But, when it was on the United States and France and Spain, Italy, no, that was okay. There was no corruption. But then they went to Moscow, Brazil, and Qatar, and that's corruption everywhere. So what I see is that either that's the part that I agree with Davidson. Until this moment, if these institutions do not adapt to the new world order, or to the multipolarity, or to the existence of BRICS, they will be simply abandoned by the BRICS, initially by the BRICS. And, just by watching the recent voting on the UN, you see that the other countries are going to follow. The rest of the world are going to follow.
Absolutely. I think this is I think it's a very good point. I feel better, I have people joining on this idea, because it makes it obvious, and they are already starting with those new parallel institutions. So they are going to use this as a leverage. does the UN is going to change or not? Because you see how many actually vetoes has been put, for example, when it comes to Israel, and every time you have the whole world voting against Israel, Israel not complying all the time, and then you have veto right by the US that blocks the whole world. But you know what? That's the US which is making the UN irrelevant. And ultimately, people need to understand that after World War II, that's where they redefined the whole rule of the game, and they had their hands everywhere. So in the UN was Rockefeller that actually gave the land to the UN. You know that there was a land that belonged to Rockefeller. And by definition, it is in the U.S. You see, and there was, that's when they created, the World Bank, the IMF, all the foundation, and they started creating the petrodollar. And so the world is like shifting slowly, but they don't want to be in direct confrontation, and it's a concerted effort. Now, and I think what is the most sensitive is the money, is the US dollar. Once you ditch the US dollar, the US will not be able to keep a high standard of living at the expense of the rest of the world. Because you see, whenever you do issue, the US lends money to the rest of the world, they issue bonds, that's a debt. But that debt is increasing all the time, but it's not meant to be repaid. This is a Ponzi scheme. Yeah. So now you have to follow closely the US dollar investors, the US bonds investors, which are countries, and they are decreasing their US bonds holding, meaning that the world, even US allies, are not willing to actually keep on paying the US, the lending money to the US, especially. So now the US, what is going to happen is that because of that, the US will not be able to sustain almost $1 trillion of defense spending. You see, and if they do,
how's it called? Interest of the debt. It's
exactly
about $1 trillion as well.
Exactly, because the interest rates went up. Now the interest, the debt is $34 trillion. So the interest rate is more than the defense spending. So now it's going to be very difficult. So what they need to do is really, I think this, either they go to war. I think there's two roads. One, either they're stubborn and they go to war and confrontation, or there's what we call, they need to negotiate on the debt, and they need to just to sit down and how can I say, when you go bankrupt, you need to renegotiate your debt, and so it's a bailout. That's what I mean, a bailout. We need to bail out the U.S. economy because it's and that's actually what I think, because people, they think that China is working against the U.S. when it comes to that, and it's not. Actually, it's in no country's interest to have the collapse of the U.S. economy. So what we need to do is to have a soft transition, peaceful transition. That's what we need. That's for the whole world, including China.
Yeah, that's a point that I wanted to, since we came to this line, I would like to ask you, because China came for the rescue in 2008, the big break of 2008, and I heard, if I'm not mistaken, it was Pepe Escobar saying, just like, about Taiwan. So, China is not going to war about Taiwan. China is going to buy Taiwan, and when you see this, all these cracks in the United States financial system, do you think that could be the bailout for getting Taiwan? The United States, you're about to break. You're about to seriously break. You know what? I come for the rescue again, with all this belligerent talking that you have about me, but just forget about Taiwan. Let it be. Remove your troops, your equipment. Just don't bother me with Taiwan.
You see, the U.S. elites, they are so corrupt that I wouldn't be surprised that they could do in a deal like this. I mean, why not? I think you see, a confrontation related to Taiwan, it would cost trillions of dollars. I mean, to the whole world. But I think it's they will at some point, if they are not willing, if the U.S. doesn't want to go to war, they might actually use some leverage over Taiwan, and that could be bargaining chips for the bailout. Yeah, absolutely. I could imagine that. Maybe a negotiation, and I think that the Chinese, just to have peace, they'd be willing to pay trillions of dollars just to get Taiwan back. But just to put into perspective, you see, China has endured what they call a century of humiliation. So China has been attacked by 8 countries, and they actually split. You had the Japanese, you had some colonies. You had Hong Kong that was in the hands of the British. You had Macau, the Portuguese, and you had Taiwan, which was also in the hands of the Japanese. So for China, they want to end this century of humiliation. And the last piece which is missing is Taiwan. And this is very deep for Chinese. Well, you see, I talk to average people in China, and whenever it's the topic of Taiwan, they are unconditional. I'll give you an example. I think most of the Chinese families, they'd be willing to send their kids to war just to get Taiwan back. That's how deep it is. That's how deep it is. Absolutely. There would be no hesitation. And actually, average people in China are more, they could be more aggressive. If it was a populist government, it would be more aggressive than the leaders. They'd be extremely aggressive, but because it runs deep. That's a humiliation that and people need to learn about Chinese history. When the Japanese came into China, they did massacres. I mean, millions of people died in the hands of Japanese, and there was never international acknowledged. There was no compensation. There was no excuse, actually. Mm-hmm. So they feel, but they're not looking for revenge. They're not. But they want dignity. That's what they want. In Chinese, we call it face. La cara, 面子, that's how they call it. And for them, it's like, and I think we should have, we have different ways to see it. Some would see this as an ego. Chinese, this face is actually dignity. It's like you came into my home, you stole things into my home. Well, I want them back. That's mine. It's about dignity. It's about being human. Human being. Be a man. Give me back this.
Now I have so it's, let's say, it's non-negotiable. This is coming back. We are patient. Yes. We have patience, but it's non-negotiable. It's going to happen. The unification. I mean, it's way of speak. I don't even know if it's correct to say that anymore, but it's going to be part of China and stay out of our business. That's more or less.
Absolutely, but you see the problem in Taiwan. There's also a huge meddling. So in Taiwan was actually very close to reunification already back in 2014. There's actually a free trade agreement between Taiwan and China. And back then, you even had the president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, that met with Xi Jinping in Singapore. So they shake hands. It was unique. And they were supposed to sign a free trade agreement. And then what happened?
I missed, what was the year?
There was 2014-15, and there was a free trade agreement to be signed. And what happens is that they had what we call a sunflower revolution. What happens is that the kids that were financed by the US, and was backed by the DPP. The DPP is pro-independence party, actually controlled by the US. They actually invaded the parliament. And because of that, they had to actually step back and say, well, we are putting this on hold. And since 2014, actually the relationship has been worsening all the time. You see, that's a pity. It's a divide and control. China, once, especially between, you see, when you look at import and export, the trade from Taiwan, 50% is with the mainland. You know, 1 million Taiwanese work in the mainland. So there is already economic de facto integration, but the West doesn't want that. So what they did a color revolution, but additional to that, already 20 years ago, they started changing the history books. So the DPP, Cheng Shui-bian, that was the president back then, he started changing history books, the same as they did in Ukraine. You know, do you rewrite history? In Ukraine, they say, oh, we are Ukrainians, we have nothing to do with Russians. In Taiwan, they started teaching kids that the history of Taiwan started in 1949. But in reality, the history of Taiwan is a history that is part of China. Yeah. So you see, and the problem is that that's how you actually brainwash a whole generation. In addition to that, you have no dissent voices. All pro-China reunification media were kicked out. They put the conditions where you are actually controlling the whole narrative. So now, when you look at actually the general sentiment in Taiwan, I would say that, 90% of Taiwanese, they want the status quo. There's a majority that want independence, but within that, the whole total, they want to keep the status quo because they know that declaring independence would mean war. Yeah.
And it's the other day I saw somewhere, I don't remember if it was on Carl Za, someone that said if the what's it called? If the PLA invades Taiwan in the morning, by lunchtime we'll be lining up to new documents.
To what?
To get new documents.
No, but to be honest, when it comes to Taiwan, there's 3 red lines, 3 red lines. Mm-hmm. That's what I define the red lines. I would say China would invade Taiwan or going to confrontation. I think it's 2 steps. They would first do the blockade and try to put pressure on Taiwan. But I would say there's red line. One is to have a nuclear missile, U.S. nuclear missiles in the Taiwan island, declaration of independence, and a massive U.S. troops in Taiwan. Those would be the red lines. But you see, it's almost impossible. Declaring independence, they would need to change the constitution, and they would have to do a referendum. It's pretty much impossible. So I would say the confrontation would probably be more into like having a U.S. puppet regime, maybe the Philippines, using the Philippines, to create a false flag operation and maybe an escalation like this. Yeah.
Okay. Angelo, we just arrived at 2 hours. Do you want to keep for another 10 minutes or
we can wrap it up. We can wrap it up. I don't know what to say, but it's just, there's a lot to say. I would say a lot of people are fearful of China, and the problem is that they've been planting seeds. There's a massive propaganda. The U.S. is spending through its propaganda network, especially there's an entity called USAGM. It's the propaganda arm of the US. They're spending billions of dollars. And additional to that, you have Hollywood, Netflix. They're planting seeds of telling us how to think, how to look at China. So I would say that we're living in interesting times. There's a shift. Yeah. It's very hopeful because I feel especially for the global south. I think the West has been very brutal, and I think it is time for people to get hold of their own destiny. And I think it's just humanistic. It's not, you see, what those people are doing, the globalist elites, is that they are using nation states. And ultimately, what they want is a system of control. But so I would say the first victims are also the West itself is actually victims of those elites that control them. In addition to that, they want us, in terms of nations, to fight each other. And we need to keep in mind that's the game. It's ultimately always something about the 99% against the 1%. So it's about raising awareness, spreading the word to say, well, we need to empower ourselves and just make sure that, we focus on what is important. Ultimately what is important is really to have a decent living, because we all the same. We're just human beings. We're just all brothers. And we have above like nasty people that actually want something dystopian for us, and we need to fight that. We need to educate people about the reality of the world, and again, look for what unites us and set aside the differences.
That's a perfect sentence to finish the video. So Angelo, thank you very much. I hope, the house is yours. The door is always open. When you want to come back, just DM me and we can just chat for 30 minutes, 15 minutes, have a beer, whatever.
Absolutely.
And thank you very much, and hope to see you again. And
My
to
pleasure.
everybody that's watching or going to watch us, all the links for Angelo are on the description of the videos. Follow Angelo, follow us, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
So what do you think? Was good, huh?
Was excellent, Angelo. No, for real. I'm not kidding at all. I enjoyed a lot. I enjoy a lot. It's been. It was really. I was. Let me just finish this because nothing.
Yeah.